Hello, everybody, and welcome to the show. I'm Adrian Daniela, your host, and this is Multifamily Chronicles. Today, our guest is Paul Rhodes. Welcome to the show, Paul.
Hey, Adrian, great to see you again.
Paul, your current position is Senior Manager of Maintenance Learning with Brookfield Multifamily, correct?
Yes, sir.
With that being said, Paul, for one or two people that don't know you yet in multifamily, why don't you walk us through your background a little bit, and then tell us a little bit about your current position with Brookfield.
Well, since we were here, and I guess we should really talk about the fact that this is kind of part two. And for anybody who's not familiar, go back about a year ago or a couple of screens ago in the YouTube channel and listen to part one, because this is it almost a year later. To kind of summarize, I started out in the apartment industry roughly 29, 30 years ago. Depending on how you look at it, I've spent time in the apartment industry, started out as a groundskeeper, picking up trash behind properties, and ended up moving through all the different levels at the site level up until I became a senior maintenance supervisor. At that point, I went to go to work for HD Supply and worked for them about 6.5 years and eventually ran their customer training department. Then I got an opportunity with the National Apartment Association, where for almost a decade, I was their national maintenance training instructor, to where I traveled around the country and taught maintenance skills and tasks and the job of maintenance. I also ran the certified apartment maintenance training curriculum, as far as keeping that updated and writing it and continuing to teach that. And then World War Germ happened. And when World War Germ happened and we could no longer be face to face, I went to work as the director of maintenance for the Life Properties. Worked there for right at or just a little over 2 years, and then got an opportunity to join Brookfield Multifamily, where I am we're creating a maintenance learning program that we're basically making something that I'm not familiar is happening with any management company right now, and that is applying resources to the process of enlarging the knowledge and skills of very specifically the maintenance workforce. I joined Brookfield in June, so it's been a very short period of time, but we've already moving things ahead, and we've got some things in planning for the future that is very novel, very what I think is a very unique opportunity, not only for me personally, but also for maintenance technicians that work at Brookfield and eventually for the industry at large. So it's a large endeavor that we're kind of laying foundational work for.
So, Paul, I know that probably some of the details, you can't really share yet because, they're work in progress, but do you have more details than just the general presentation of this program that you're about to, implement out there, that you're building, that you could share with the audience? And if you don't, then, that's fine.
Well, the details themselves, it's still being developed, so I can't really go into there. But I think what's really interesting is what we've got happening at Brookfield, and one of the reasons why I joined them as an organization is what you reference a lot on your show and a lot on your postings, and that is the culture that is happening at Brookfield. And I'm hopeful that that cultural mindset expands just beyond Brookfield, because quite selfishly, it's the best I've ever seen. It's fantastic, and I love being at Brookfield, and what we have going on there is very, very exciting, and it is really, really neat. that kind of goes to really, I think, where we end up picking up from our conversation before. Of in the last session, you asked me a question about culture, and I backed it up one level and never ended up answering your question. So the exciting thing about Brookfield and really why I made the change wasn't for money, it wasn't for title or any of the other things. It was truly a cultural shift, not going from a bad one to a good one, going from a culture that I agreed with to another culture that is much more exciting and much more in line with what my goals are and what I want to do.
Paul, I would love to set a lot of time discussing culture. Before we get into culture and discuss everything through from a culture standpoint, because culture, like you just said, I speak about it, I write about it a lot, I'm very passionate about. But before we get to that, you have trained thousands of people, right? Is that fair to say? Yeah.
Yes.
So
yes.
You've been in front of thousands of people. I want to bring up a couple of specific topics to the conversation. The first topic is most companies, and on a management side, on an executive side, are looking to hire certified techs. By certified techs, they mean someone that has the EPA card. That has the EPA card that allows them to handle refrigerants according to to the law. But their thinking in their mind is that when you hire someone that's certified, that has that EPA card, they know how to troubleshoot, how to fix HVACs. The reality is that they couldn't be more wrong about it. That's only the beginning piece of being allowed to be next to a unit, use refrigerant, charge it out. But charging a unit is really not just. It's a small piece. It's a very small, tiny piece of everything HVAC, and it's probably one of the less things to worry about when you're looking at the system. And the reality is, because this misconception has been perpetuated over the years, technicians embraced it. And even residents embraced it. We will have service requests that are saying, my AC is not cooling, it needs Freon. My unit needs Freon. So, Paul, I would like for you to touch on this misconception. First of all, address it. And second of all, tell me, in your opinion, how long do you think it takes for someone that has very little knowledge, they're very basic with maintenance skills, to become a skilled, very well-rounded maintenance technician, that they could do over average work in all those areas: HVAC, electrical, plumbing, carpentry, so on and so forth?
Let's start with the second part of your conversation first. That is such a challenging question to answer, because our industry, being an apartment maintenance technician, there is so very few industry accepted standards. And by that, think about a car mechanic. A car mechanic, in order to become a car mechanic, to get I think it's the ASME certification, that is an industry-wide certification that in the mechanics world, everybody knows what that means. And in order to do that, in order to get that certification, it's my understanding that not only is it a written test, but it's a practical test. In other words, you have to prove repeatedly and through multiple examples that you know how to, I'm going to make a horrible mess of this because I'm not an auto mechanic, but you know how to remove the right lug nut and put it back on. but that is an understood across both inside and outside the industry credential and certification. Being an apartment maintenance technician is a challenging thing because on the whole, this job, kind of like what you and Russ Webb were talking about in your recent episode, this is a non-intentional career, especially on the maintenance side of the house. We fall in. I fell into the industry. You have said you fell in, and a lot of other people on your show have talked about the fact that I didn't set out in life saying, I'm going to be an apartment maintenance guy. We fell in. But, you know, it's like that big hole that once you fall in, it's hard to climb out. And then eventually, when you do decide to climb out, or if you decide to climb out in this analogy, you kind of look back and say, you know what, it wasn't so bad, so we go back. That's what happened with me. I went and spent a year as a swimming pool contractor. I built and remodeled swimming pools. And after 12 months, right at 12 months, I looked back and said, you know what, I really liked it. And came back into the industry and got involved. I've been dancing around it, but really and truly, I think that it takes probably 2 or 3 years of somebody who's very intentional at being an apartment maintenance technician to become a proficient maintenance technician. You know, Malcolm Gladwell in his book, he says, if you do anything for 10,000 hours, you become an expert. Well, okay, 10,000 hours at 40 hours a week of being in maintenance. If I remember right, that works out to over 5 years or so.
A little bit. It's 2080. If you work 40 hours a week, it's 2,080 hours a year.
Yeah, so it's right at 5 or just a little bit under 5 years. So then taking that as the example, 5 years to become an expert at being a apartment maintenance technician, supervisor, worker. The challenge there, though, is you only become an expert if you've been at one property for 5 years. You only become an expert at those systems unless, as an intentional person, I'm not just studying this Carrier, this Ream, this Goodman unit, or the Moen faucet, or this particular GFCI. I have to be intentional and say, okay, if I'm working on an air conditioning system, for instance, I have to be intentional and say, okay, the Goodman unit that I'm working on, it has a service valve with a couple of O-rings on the inside of it. If I go and install it and I remove those O-rings and I braze it in fast enough, I don't melt those O-rings, and I can reuse and lock it down or tap it off and do all of the things that the Goodman unit was designed for. But I have to be intentional and go beyond that. Goodman uses that style valve. What about Trane? Trane uses a different style valve. And as a matter of fact, where a Trane unit, they use the rotolock connections at the compressor. Well, if I have only worked on one property for 5 years or one type of system, and I become an expert on that system, that's great. But if I can't transfer that knowledge to another system, to another property, then that's where the challenge becomes. And as an industry as a whole, the part that we're lacking and where that mechanics analogy comes into play is, in order to get that ASME certification, you have to know not only how to work on a Toyota or a Ford or a Chevy or whatever other brand, you have to know how to work the commonalities of all of them and when to get specific on the individual brand that you're working on. Well, for an apartment maintenance technician, we have to do the same thing. We have to understand the 3 or 4 different types of valves that are found in faucets. And no matter which one I'm working on right now, I need to have a baseline of knowledge so that I can go to an individual faucet and know what the troubleshooting path or what the steps to fix that are, more than just, I've only ever worked on a Delta ball valve faucet. And once I get outside of the Delta ball valve faucet, if you put me in front of a Moen, which is a cartridge faucet, there are some things that transfer, but there are some other things. If you try and fix a Moen the way that you took apart the Delta, it's never going to happen. So all of that, to answer your question, I think that a maintenance technician really needs to be involved and intentional about their work for 2 to 3 years to get a sense of what's going on. And then to be an expert, I would say 5 years. And that is 5 years of multi-site experience where they've been exposed to more than just one type of faucet, one type of system, one type of building environment. So to answer that was the second part of your question, I think. The first part of your question, it was the certification issue. And this is a huge one because we are in the South and Georgia, Florida, Texas, Mississippi, all across the South, air conditioning is such a huge issue. That EPA certification carries a lot of weight because when the air conditioner goes down, that's it. The residents are affected big time. And suddenly everybody has a medical issue for why the air conditioner has to be fixed right now. Yes, it is an important issue. I know in my house, my own home, if I come home and my wife meets me at the door and she says, honey, I'm hot, my answer better not be, yes, you are. It needs to be something along the lines of, what do you mean you're hot? The air conditioner is broken and I better have an answer for it. Otherwise, I'm sleeping in the doghouse. Air conditioning is, especially down south, absolutely essential. One thing that's missing, though, that seems to be overlooked quite a bit is that proper air conditioning is essential, not only for resident comfort, but it's for the longevity of our buildings. You know, moisture in the air, which air conditioning removes that moisture. Moisture in the air can lead to that 4-letter word that you and I both know none of our management companies have because we've outlawed the use of that 4-letter word. Mold. Well, one of the primary things we have to do is get rid of the moisture in the air, which is what the air conditioning system does. So that means that we've got to have proper running air conditioning systems. And the biggest mistake leads to exactly what you have suppositioned, what you've questioned. There is a huge impetus or a huge importance on air conditioning repairs. Because of that, one of the nationally recognized certifications, as a matter of fact, arguably it's the only federally recognized certification that the apartment industry has, is that EPA Section 608 certification, which is the refrigerant reclamation certification put into place from the Montreal Protocol, now updated in 2018 to be a new test that is rolled out and is constant now. It is a nationally recognized certification, but the common misunderstanding is exactly what you stated. Just because somebody is certified does not mean they know how to do anything. And the reason why that's an important fact is the certification was never designed to prove proficiency. It wasn't designed that way. The Environmental Protection Agency intentionally states when it was created back in, when it was enforced back in 1993, and when it was updated, they continued it. It is purely an administrative certification. You get the book from any supplier, you memorize the book, and then you take a 100-question test, you're certified. And you don't even have to be able to point out the difference between a condenser and an evaporator physically. If you memorize it, you've got the test. And not only that, trade schools, HVAC contractors, manufacturers all across the board regularly state 85% of all equipment failures are not related to refrigerant. Let me say that again. The overwhelming majority of work orders do not require refrigerant to make the repair. Yes, you mentioned earlier that technicians have gone along with this, saying that the certification is this big important thing. I mean, I know from talking to technicians at conferences and all around the country, management companies actually give a raise for achieving that certification. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing, because it is an achievement and it's a verifiable achievement. It is a level to get there. But in the process of creating this overvalue on the certification, we somehow lost the fact that the majority of time, the physical skills required to solve a resident problem with air conditioning doesn't have anything to do with the need for that certification to occur at all. Overwhelmingly, it's airflow issues, it's electrical issues, it's mechanical issues. Oh yeah, and then I also got to have these really cool, neat gadgets and gizmos and tools that I get to use every once in a while to fix the refrigerant side of a system. So every manager, when I'd go to properties with on site and I'd get a manager saying, I need to hire somebody who's certified, my response is, no, you don't need to hire somebody who's certified. Getting somebody certified is easy. I can pick anybody off the street, and if they can memorize that book, they can get certified without ever seeing anything to go. And not only that, if all we're hiring a maintenance technician to do is throw some Freon, for lack of a better term, into a system, if I'm just hiring you to throw Freon into a system, I've already lost. Because if all our technicians are doing is throwing Freon or refrigerant into a system, then we are shortening the life drastically of that system. And unfortunately, it's not only the apartment industry that is suffering this way. It is the air conditioning industry at large. Case in point, a few years ago, I had my system at my house replaced. I called a contractor in. I wanted them to do it because I wanted the full 10-year manufacturer warranty on my system. A part of that came with 1 year free inspection service, to where every 6 months, the installation company that came out would check my system, verify it, do a little bit of preventive maintenance, but mainly just verify that the way things are supposed to work is what they're doing. The technician they sent out, who was not the installer was fantastic. He was great. The technician they sent out came and looked, and he went out to the outside unit, checked that, and then came inside and began looking for the indoor capacitor on an ECM motor. Now, for those in the audience not familiar with it, an ECM motor, electrically commutated motor, does not have a capacitor. And if you're familiar with this as a service technician, you pull the cover off, you can identify it just by looking at the motor. You don't even have to dig or anything. All of a sudden, this guy pulled the cover off, looked at the motor, grabbed his wire cutters, and began to remove all the zip ties that had the wire bundles together, all nice and neat. And I stopped him. I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "Well, I need to test the capacitor." I said, "You can just get out." He says, "What do you mean?" I explained to him that motor doesn't have it. And what really struck me is, here's a guy that's on a truck with a reputable service company that they did a great job installing the system, but this guy is their technician. He's the guy they send out to people who have this system in there, and he's supposed to verify it working, and it's obvious he doesn't even know it's working. My guess is he's a certified technician. My guess is he's there to because he's got that EPA certification, he was hired to run the truck. But in my mind, that is very basic information. So the point of this story is that if we, as employers, as leaders in an industry that are relying on people to provide service to our residents, one, we need to have an idea of what service we need them to provide and be able to prioritize that, not a piece of paper or the ability to answer a test question. We need them to know what it is that we need them to know. And as leaders, we've got to have an idea on what's behind that. It was so exciting. I watched this morning the episode you just recorded with Russ Webb down there in Florida. And it was exciting to me, the fact that they've taken their office space. If I understood it correctly, they took their office space and turned it into a maintenance training space.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, that's brilliant. That's just phenomenally awesome. And Russ is a great guy. I remember being a part and doing some training at the facility that he created up here in Atlanta before he went to Florida. And just, wow, just it's so exciting to see what he's got going on.
Yeah, super exciting. Paul, what recommendations would you have for someone that's in a maintenance field, in a multifamily maintenance field? What type of recommendations you have as far as resources, reading, books, things to improve themselves? What are some, really, really good materials that you would recommend to someone that, like you said, they're intentional about their career. They want to become better. They don't just wait for a company to provide them, the resources. They could go out there and look for those resources themselves. So let's make it easier, right? Just make it available for them. Could you think of some great literature, some great, books that you would like to share with the audience?
I think the answer to that is a challenging one from a stereotype. And that is the stereotype that apartment maintenance technicians typically are not right now looking for those resources. And I really think that's got to change. It may be a little bit of chicken and egg scenario in that there are so very, very few resources specific to the apartment maintenance industry that list will be very, very short. But I think the bigger issue is the fact that we've got to change the discussion a little bit on being a maintenance technician does not mean that you have to know everything right now, instantly, just like that. Some of that is how we've treated our residents, especially during World War Germ. We got to the point to where we actually incentivized our maintenance teams to spend as little amount of time with our residents as possible. We had to, for understandable reasons, we wanted to shorten that interaction time. So as a result, and this kind of feeds into that culture thing, as a result, we took away the ability, as unintended consequences, we took away the need for our maintenance technicians to figure things out. In other words, I go into a resident's apartment and the dishwasher's broken. In order for me to diagnose that dishwasher, Under normal terms, normal circumstances, I would need to pull the dishwasher out, maybe flip it upside down, take out my meter, move and interact with take up a lot of space in that kitchen for a period of time, whatever that period of time is. Well, as a whole and as a country, we essentially told our maintenance technicians, no, I want you in and out of there as fast as possible. First of all, if the resident calls us at all, because we told them not to call. And then second of all, when they do call, if you go in there, I want you in there as short a period of time as possible for all of the various reasons. The unintended consequence was the maintenance guy would end up going in there. The maintenance gal would go in there, take one look at it, turn it on. And if the answer was not completely and totally obvious, replace the dishwasher. Because replacing the dishwasher is faster and less interaction than actually troubleshooting. So we went through a time period of 1.5 years or 2 years where we decreased the need to troubleshoot and we increase the need to order, to organize, to schedule, which those needs are still there and they have always been there. The end result is now we're in an environment where our residents expect troubleshooting to happen just like that. And not only that, the overwhelming of our residents on larger properties is if I call you with a problem, just replace it. Don't fix it. That is unfortunately what we have created or has been created due to circumstances. And now we're getting back to it. So the first thing I would say on resources available for maintenance technicians is, first of all, be sure that our maintenance technicians know it's okay to not have an instant answer. The second thing is a caveat to that. It's okay to not have an instant answer as long as we know where to go to get an answer. And that's the part where your question comes into play. What resources are available? The first one that I use quite a bit, I mean, it's just a little bit of afternoon reading, very, very small, but it's troubleshooting and repairing major appliances. Really, really good resource. It is available as an ebook. That way you don't have to carry this thing around. I've got it downloaded on my phone in a reading app so that I can use it as a reference. And it's got some really, really good troubleshooting guides in it. On a larger picture for the apartment industry, I use and reference this, which, this was a multifamily housing textbook, industry textbook. This was put together or helped put together by someone you and I know very well, Dr. Debbie Phillips, was instrumental in getting this tome set. And it is the business of multifamily and the apartment industry as a good reference. From heating and air conditioning, any resource by HVAC Excellence, which is the ESCO, part of ESCO Press, any of their resources or books on heating and air conditioning is a fantastic reference that they end up having. But I think it's real clear, really crystal. All of these are references. In other words, even the one I said, the appliance book that I said was a little bit of light reading, it's a reference. In other words, it's not a book I'm going to sit down and read cover to cover. Books like that, I think, require a little bit more imagination or a little bit more creativity on how to apply knowledge from one area into another area. A really good book that I've read this year that completely changed my mind in a lot of areas is a book called How to Think Like a Rocket Scientist by Ozan. I'm probably destroying his name. Ozan Varul. It's a fantastic book that a lot of it applies to being a maintenance technician, without talking about being a maintenance technician. It's problem solving, it's troubleshooting, it's being creative or thinking outside of the individual box. Other books, the other big one that has changed the way I look at my job as a leader is a book by Brené Brown called Daring to Lead. And I think you've talked about it on previous episodes, just the need for training or development for our maintenance teams in that skill on how to be a leader. When I was with NAA, we created an online training program or online module called CAMT+L, which is the Plus Leadership Credential. And I honestly don't know how successful it has been or is. I know that there is very little discussion or little marketing towards that for our maintenance technicians. I would love to see that bigger, partially from a selfish standpoint. I helped create it and I want to make sure that other people know of it, but even bigger from an industry standpoint, that you've said it on show in previous episodes. We have a challenge in that the median age for being an apartment maintenance technician is getting older and older, mainly because we're not getting a lot of younger people involved. And I don't have a solution for it, but the end result is we've got to develop the people that do join our industry in more than just how to fix things. That's a part of it. We've got to have that ability to fix things, but we also have to develop leaders.
Develop leaders and also teach people how to manage. Teach managers how to manage. Give them. I don't want to shy away from saying that we need managers. Of course, we need leaders.
Oh yeah.
But we also need. I think we desperately need managers. To me personally, the way I see management and leadership, management is gonna the intermediary thing into getting to to become a leader somehow. Yeah, of course, you could be a leader without having a title of a manager, but at the same time, you might not have the title. But if you don't have those traits that are making you eventually a leader, then you can't manage. So in other words, for me, it's like it's a two-step process. And there's no shame into saying that, we badly need managers. And especially we need service managers. So this brings me to the next, to the next topic, right? Service managers, let's talk about, honestly, how is someone becoming a service manager? It's a team of 2 or 3. They're the highest, producing maintenance technician out there. They're producing the largest amount of, problem solving work orders, service requests, let's say, and something happens with the service manager. They move on, they leave the industry, they get fired, whatever happens to them. And here you go, you're the next in line because you're the highest producing maintenance technician. Here's the keys. From now on, congratulations, shaking your hand. You're going to manage, you're going to co-manage a 60, 70, $80 million asset. Good luck to you. How crazy is that?
You're asking the right question in there, but actually in tradition for the same thing I did the first time. Let's back up one layer behind your question, because I completely agree with you. That's a point. But we also need to back up one level above that. If we say we need more service managers, do we actually know what that solution to the problem is? Because have we defined the problem? By that, I mean, when you say we need a service manager, someone who's going to co-manage, do we have the culture around that that knows what it means to co-manage. That right there is the crux. When I was with Life Properties, and I've even run into it a few times with Brookfield, you have a service manager or maintenance supervisor, or whatever the title says, that they're in that role. And in private moments, when you talk with them and kind of get past the whatever barrier is in place to where you get to that point of vulnerability and point of honesty, and you ask them, how are you doing? How are you? Are you doing your job? And their reply is, I think so. Or their reply is, you know what? I would love to just go back being a technician. In those moments, that I think is a problem we've got to, before we get to the point of solving it, we've got to define what that role is. And by that, you said we need managers. Great. I completely agree with you. What are we having them manage? When I was on site, and this was 17, 18, I left on site in 2005. So 17 years ago. When I was on site, the way the properties I was at was run, and the way throughout my career of observation, now that I'm out of on site and get to be that independent third party eye that goes on, my belief and my experience tells me that the best run properties are exactly what I believe you're implying of that co-management model. I tend to think of it in terms of a traditional marriage, to where you've got a husband and a wife, and they both are in it together. Both of them are providing 100%. And yet in the traditional marriage, you've got one with the right of veto that carries all the responsibility. I tend to look at property management at the site level as having that same relationship. If we're saying we need more maintenance supervisors, are we saying, or whatever that role is, some of the lead the maintenance team, are we saying we need to develop people to be that co-manager person that understands they have a stake, and the manager that leads the office of the operations of the properties, they have a stake, and they both are working together? I know you've heard it. I know, because you've been to conferences and around that. A lot of maintenance technicians, maintenance supervisors, maintenance teams, they get frustrated by the amount of micromanagement that happens on site. That is, when I was teaching and around and at conferences and doing sessions, and that was the number one complaint, is they just micromanage. Okay, that's a fact. Let's define it. Why are they micromanaging? Why is our office micromanaging? I fundamentally believe, and my experience tells me, they're micromanaging because they are held responsible for their output, for their product, for what they produce. In this case, profits, budget, meeting budget, hours, overtime, whatever the metric is that they're going for, that property manager is held responsible for that. And no one else on the team has an understanding of what that means. For whatever reason, they micromanage, which I think that term is really ill-defined anyway, but they micromanage. They get so overly involved in the maintenance side of the house because, for whatever reason, the maintenance side of the house, that manager, that property leader, does not have the trust that they can go to their maintenance team and say, hey, I need these 5 apartments ready in 7 days. Or even better, they can go to there and have a conversation with the maintenance side of the house and says that the maintenance side already knows that there are 5 apartments coming available that we need to have happen. Are we, as an industry, developing our maintenance teams to know how to read the availability a month ahead of time. One of the biggest frustration points for me, and this goes and speaks directly to it, is we are not developing our maintenance technicians to the point of pulling that availability once a week and looking not for today's work, looking not for next week's work, looking for next month's work. The majority of leases are on at least a 45-day notice to vacate. That means that 45 days, a month and a half ahead of time, we already know who's moving out. So if that's true, then that means we know next month I need to turn 10 apartments. And to oversimplify it, that means if I'm turning 10 apartments, I need to order 40 drip pans. I need to order 10 toilet seats. I need to order, insert whatever we need to order here. We're not teaching that very, very basic skills and then extrapolate it out from there. All of those other skills. So here's the point, and gets back to answer the original question. How do we train maintenance supervisors or leaders of the maintenance team? The first thing we have to do is be sure that we have a culture of importance, that everybody has an understanding of, first of all, on paper, what their role entails, and then what their role actually is at that job. Because just because your job description says you do ABC 1, 2, 3, you and I both know, Adrian, yes, that job description, that got me hired. That's where I started. But if I only do ABC 1, 2, 3, that ABC 1, 2, 3 was oftentimes written or compiled 6 months ago, and the industry has changed, especially now. ABC 1, 2, 3, it could be that number 2 and C, we're not even doing on our properties anymore because we've already changed technologies. We don't need that anymore. We need to get to the point to where our culture is such a thing that everybody knows what their priorities are, how they interface with the places they reach and touch up against, and everybody's moving towards that same goal, that same vision. So that's really and truly how I think we need to answer that question of how do we develop maintenance supervisors? We've got to make sure that we identify what that role means and how that what the reporting structure looks like.
I couldn't articulate it better, Paul, and thank you for doing it. This brings me back to the next episode's topic, culture.
Culture. Well, real quick. When you say culture, I'm going to ask you a question. I'll put you a little bit on the spot here, Adrian. When you say culture, and you say it an awful lot, what is your definition of culture? You know, we say we hire for culture. We want a good thing. What is your definition of culture?
I love to share that. To me, culture, it's the sum of all the employees' behaviors in organization. The sum of all behaviors, everything that you see exhibiting as a behavior, to all of the employees, from the very entry level person to the CEO of the company or the president of the company combined, that's what your culture is, day in and day out, because it's behaviors, exhibited behaviors. And the way you influence a culture, you reward the type of culture that you want to have. In other words, you reward the type of behavior that you wanted to see more of, and then you basically look at ways to minimize the type of behaviors that you don't want to see in a workplace. What is your take, and what is your definition of culture, and what do you think about this definition?
I like it. I agree with you to the point that your definition of culture is on the output side. on the this is what we're producing and this we want to reproduce, and we're going to hold accountable to this level. So in other words, at some point, your definition of culture is we define it with a metric, it's measurable, it's set, and everything above that we want to entice or drive. That's what we want. And everything below that, we want to stay away from. So at some point, there's an accountability that goes in there. And I can't disagree with what you said and how that's there. My definition of culture is actually a little bit different in that my definition of culture is the feeling that surrounds the way that decisions are made within an organization. In other words, if I say, and here's the big case in point, I've been doing a lot of study here lately about or preparing for this year's Apartmentalize, which is here in Georgia. This next year, it'll be in 2023 in Georgia, and I'm hopeful that I get to speak there again, because I still love the National Apartment Association, and that event is a huge networking event. I really, really hope that more maintenance people attend, which is where my point comes into play. Management companies, and I know you've heard it, and may even have been a part of some organizations or various things to where management companies say we value our maintenance workers. They are essential. We value our maintenance teams. And that's a great thing to say. But does your decision-making process reflect the truth of that statement? According to the National Apartment Association, according to their own data, attendance at Apartmentalize is 5-1, meaning for every single maintenance worker across the board of all levels, technician, supervisor, regional, corporate, every single person who identifies as a maintenance worker for the National Apartment Association at Apartmentalize, there are 5 times as many property managers, one role, 5 times the amount of property managers attend Apartmentalize for every single maintenance worker as a whole. So here's the crux, and the reason why I bring that up. If your organization says we value our maintenance workers, and yet it's a 5-1 difference within your organization on the amount of development that is being offered, what does the feeling go to your maintenance workers on how much they are actually valued? In the conversation you had with Russ Webb in the most recent episode, she brought up somebody, a very dear friend of mine by the name of Mary Gwynn. Her organization, Apartment Dynamics, every year now, they make a point of taking maintenance supervisors and maintenance workers to conferences and national events. And I know that's just a microcosm, that is a small example, but that is an example of decision making that reinforces the fact. So if we're going to have a discussion on culture, how do we affect that feeling? How do we change the way decisions are made so that we get to the point to where our maintenance workers who are already on our property know without a shadow of a doubt that actions match what they're feeling? Because at that point, that's where the culture changes.
Big deal. Walk the talk. That's another component. Now, I'm gonna ask you, Paul, would you come back to do an episode just on culture alone, and how we see certain things, how we see certain parts of the business, especially the maintenance that you and I are coming from mainly, right? How does that affect training, the on-call, the recruiting, the teamwork? How does that impacts, our teams, our maintenance teams. Because I think there's so much value into people hearing from someone like you and actually better understanding. Because I think that for the most part, it's a matter of like not actually taking the time to understand the effects of culture have on our maintenance teams. Like you said, and I actually said this when I wrote about it. I said, if you really want to know how much a maintenance is appreciated in a company, look at corporate level and compare how many people you have oversight in maintenance versus management. In my opinion, if you really value it and they're the backbone of your business, it has to be one-on-one. It doesn't have to be regional maintenance director. It could be a floater, someone that's at a corporate level, part of the support team for maintenance. But the parity should be 1-for-1. One regional manager or assistant regional or admin person that supports the maintenance teams on the operation side, and one maintenance person. That's again, it could be challenged. It could be considered, it's subjective, obviously. But I will say that if you really value as a company, your structure, your culture, and your maintenance teams, probably you should be seeing, the closer you get to that ratio, 1-for-1, then the more weight your statement has. Do you disagree?
I can agree with that. I never have thought about it in those terms, and I would love to ponder that more. But the one thing that comes to mind, though, if that is a goal that expands that career pathing, that we right now as an industry, we are very challenged all around. I don't think as an industry we do a good enough job of creating and promoting a career path on, and not just for maintenance. I mean, you and I, we're very discriminatory on the maintenance side of things because we need more maintenance. We've got to have maintenance.
Absolutely.
But if we take step back, the reality is I'm not sure there's that good of a career path on that leasing or office side either. And I'm honestly not sure that in the same way that being a good maintenance technician really truly does not create the skills necessary to be a good maintenance supervisor.
Absolutely.
There is some parts that you've got to know. It's a stepping stone, but we don't have a career pathway or a learning pathway in a lot of examples to bridge that gap. And in the same way, I don't think that the skills of being a good leasing agent lead to being a good assistant manager. Or in the skills of being a good assistant manager, I don't think lead to being a property manager. Somebody like my good friend Vicky Sharp, who's a speaker, she talks about this quite a bit, that career path is a challenging one to make. Leah Brewer has also talked about this in conferences and seeing her things and set. And I agree with that. I think one of the areas that we are challenged at, one of the big opportunities we have, is creating that career path, not only as an industry, but down to our property level as well. To really market or get across that message that, hey, if you are a maintenance technician, if you learn skill ABC 1, 2, 3, then you set yourself in a position to move up to that next role or title when it comes available. And the reality is we need more apartments, we need more rental properties, so those positions are coming available. And it goes back to something I said during the first episode. Being an apartment maintenance technician, there is a lot of job security to go around, and especially for those in the audience who unfortunately are being downsized in those tech jobs, in what's going on with all of the social media areas that are laying off the thousands of people. Come to be apartment maintenance technician. You don't have to punch a keyboard all day. Matter of fact, it's great. You get to run around outside when the weather's good. When the weather's bad, yeah, you got to go outside, but you get to work with your hands. And when you're finished, you get to see the results and you directly affect somebody's lives. You are that superhero that you get to be. So being an apartment maintenance technician is the best job in the world, best role in the world.
Well, it seems like the more we talk, like the more things that we haven't touched on. We're kind of opening not a can of, but it's kind of like a whole box of cans of worms, and they just open up, which is a great thing actually. Which is a great thing. I would love to have you back on to continue the conversation, to do more episodes, because it's your perspective is very fascinating and it's very, very useful and it's very needed. Voices like yours are needed to be heard on a regular basis. And why am I saying that? Conferences are great, and I'm trying to attend. And I had a couple of opportunities to speak myself too this year, but they only capture the current audience, whatever is audience, 50, 100, or 500 people at the time. Conversations like this, they could be put out on the internet, and they're living there forever. And a conversation like this, your input on so many important topics in the industry lives there forever, and it's not something that is gonna change overnight. It's gonna still be relevant 5 months, 10 months, 12 months from now, maybe 2 years, 3 years, 5 years, some of the topics. I'd love to have you back here to discuss. Maybe next episode we'll make it exclusively, excuse me, about culture. We're making a point to not, to stay on the culture and just discuss culture and break it down, how it affects all of the phases of our, maintenance mainly. How does culture affect? Are you in for it?
I'm in for it, and I'll even put two challenges there to your audience. Homework as a trainer, as an educator. You can't just go with what's there. There has to be application beyond. So here's the question: if you're watching and if you're there, think for a moment about your culture, the feelings surrounding the way that decisions are made at your property or where you're at. And to Adrian's point, the output, what you're producing, good, bad, or otherwise. Here's the questions, 2 questions to think about. First, what does it look like for your maintenance technician for that 2:30 a.m. emergency water line break? Not how they fix it. What does the thought process for your maintenance guy look like at 2:30 in the morning? That thought process is what we're looking for, because that, I think, is where culture meets the road. Those decisions that are made right then and there, the culture that has been defined beforehand in the middle of that crisis, where the culture meets reality point. And then secondarily, and possibly even more important, but harder to answer, is what does the day-to-day, 10 o'clock in the middle of, October, when summer is done, winter isn't really here yet, there's a lot of work to do, but there's nothing that is yelling and screaming having to be done right here, that to where your maintenance supervisor, your leader of your maintenance team at your property, what does it look like for them in that moment of, I've got a lot of things to do, how do I decide what is priority next? Again, that decision process, that's where the culture shows. That's where you're driving the good things and diminishing the bad things. Those 2 points. So the homework between now and the next time we come together: 1, middle of the night, urgency. What is the decision process for your maintenance technician? Second thing, normal every day. What does it look like? How do they determine priorities? I'm there whenever you're ready. You can tell I'm shy and bashful, so it'll be really hard to come out of my shell.
Those are excellent segues to get into the next episode. I'd love to have you back here within the next few weeks, actually, to record. We don't have to wait another 11 months. I can't even believe it's such a shame that it's been almost a year, and we discussed that, hey, we're gonna have another one soon. But Paul, I can't thank you enough. It's been an amazing conversation, amazing insights. Always a pleasure to have you here to have a conversation with you, and I'm sure that the audience will learn a lot from this content, from your wisdom.
I'm still trying to figure it out myself. That's the fun. That's what makes it enjoyable.
Everybody, this was Multifamily Chronicles. I'm your host, Paul Rhodes, our guest today. We both thank you for watching, and I hope to see you back here soon. Have a great day.